At a crucial moment for environmental policy and the limits of American federalism, the fate of California's electric vehicle, EV mandate, has become a legal battleground with implications that transcend state borders. The Advanced Clean Cars Do rule, which requires 100% of new cars sold in the state to be zero emission by 2035, is not just a local measure. It directly influences 17 states that have adopted similar standards, impacting 40% of the national automotive market. The crux of the debate lies in a unique authority granted to California by the Clean Air Act of 1970, the ability to request federal waivers to establish emission standards stricter than federal regulations. This mechanism, originally created to combat the state's chronic air pollution, has been reinterpreted in the era of climate change to encompass greenhouse gases. The Biden administration's approval of the waiver in 2023 set a precedent, but also ignited a constitutional controversy. To what extent can a state dictate policies with national effects? Now, in 2025, the Trump administration's strategy to revoke this authority, using a combination of legislation, regulatory reviews, and executive orders, pits two fundamental principles against each other: the right of states to protect their population under the 10th Amendment and the federal power to regulate interstate commerce. The House of Representatives has already passed a bill, H.R. 346, to block the mandate, while the EPA has submitted California's waivers to the Congressional Review Act, a rarely used mechanism to nullify regulations. Behind the political maneuvers, urgent questions emerge. What is the limit of state autonomy in a country with globalized environmental challenges? How to balance technological innovation and consumer freedom of choice? And above all, what will be the cost, environmental, economic, and social, of delaying the energy transition? This report examines the legal complexities, the industrial interests at stake, and the possible scenarios of an impasse that could redefine not only the future of electric cars, but also the contours of American federalism in the 21st century. The battle over California's electric vehicle mandate is more than a regulatory dispute. It's a reflection of the fundamental tensions shaping contemporary American politics. On one side, we have the urgency of climate action, personified by California's ambitious goal to phase out fossil fuel-powered vehicles. On the other, there are concerns about consumer autonomy, the economic costs of transition, and the delicate balance between state and federal authority. The Clean Air Act of 1970, in granting California the unique power to request waivers for stricter emission standards, recognized the exceptional air pollution challenges faced by the state. This provision, initially focused on local pollutants like smog, has evolved to encompass greenhouse gas emissions, reflecting our expanding understanding of environmental threats. The EPA's 2023 approval for California's plan to phase out gasoline vehicles by 2035 was a milestone, extending the scope of the waiver to explicitly include climate change mitigation. However, critics argue that this expansion goes beyond the original intent of the law. They question whether climate change, a global challenge, can be considered a compelling and extraordinary condition specific to California, as required by the Clean Air Act. This argument forms the legal basis for the current revocation efforts. The Trump administration, taking office in 2025, launched a multi-pronged offensive against California's mandate. Executive Order 13990, titled Unleashing American Energy, set the tone by directing federal agencies to terminate state emissions waivers that function to limit sales of gasoline-powered automobiles. While executive orders don't have immediate legal force, they signal policy priorities and guide future regulatory actions. Congress entered the fray with the Preserving Choice in Vehicle Purchases Act, H.R. 346, which aims to explicitly prohibit the EPA from granting waivers that limit the sale of vehicles with internal combustion engines. The bill's passage in the House, with bipartisan support, highlights the divide not just between parties but also between regions, with representatives from states dependent on the traditional auto industry often aligning against California's mandate. Perhaps the boldest maneuver is the EPA's use of the Congressional Review Act, CRA. By submitting California's waivers for congressional review, the Trump administration is exploiting a procedural loophole. The Biden administration didn't submit the waivers to Congress during their enactment, allowing Trump's EPA to restart the 60-day review clock. If successful, this strategy would not only revoke the current waivers, but also prevent future administrations from issuing similar rules without congressional approval. The legal debate extends beyond the interpretation of the Clean Air Act. Legal scholars are debating whether California's mandate violates the Dormant Commerce Clause, which prohibits states from enacting laws that unduly burden interstate commerce. While courts have historically upheld California's emission standards, reasoning that they incentivize rather than compel automakers to adjust national production, the stringent 2035 phase-out schedule might face renewed scrutiny. For the auto industry, regulatory uncertainty is a significant concern. Manufacturers like Ford and GM have already invested billions in EV production lines, and a policy reversal could disrupt supply chains and delay emissions reductions. The prospect of a patchwork of state regulations, should California's waiver be revoked, presents logistical and financial challenges for an industry that operates on a national scale. The environmental and public health implications of revocation are equally significant. California's mandate aims to reduce smog-forming pollutants by 25% and greenhouse gas emissions by 50% by 2040. These goals are particularly crucial for disadvantaged communities, who often bear the disproportionate burden of air pollution. The heavy-duty omnibus rule, which targets nitrogen oxide emissions from trucks, is especially critical for improving air quality in freight corridors like the Los Angeles Basin. As Congress prepares to vote on the CRA resolutions in March 2025, stakeholders on all sides are mobilizing. Environmental groups argue that revoking California's mandate would significantly hamper U.S. climate mitigation efforts and set a dangerous precedent for weakening environmental protections. On the other hand, consumer rights groups and certain segments of the auto industry express concerns about EV affordability and the forced pace of transition. The outcome of this showdown will have repercussions far beyond California, or even the automotive sector. It will test the limits of cooperative federalism in an era of global environmental challenges, potentially redefining the balance between state and federal authority on environmental policy issues. Moreover, the case is likely to set important precedents on the scope of federal agencies' regulatory power and the application of the Congressional Review Act. As the debate unfolds, it's crucial to recognize the nuances and trade-offs involved. The transition to electric vehicles promises significant environmental benefits and could drive American technological innovation. However, it also presents challenges in terms of infrastructure, raw material supply, and economic adaptation for communities dependent on the traditional auto industry. The impasse over California's electric vehicle mandate is more than a political dispute. It's a watershed moment that will test America's ability to navigate the complex intersection of environmental policy, technological innovation, and federal governance. As the case winds its way through the courts and corridors of power, it will not only shape the future of transportation in the U.S., but also provide a template for how the country addresses the urgent and often divisive challenges of climate change within the context of its unique federal system.